You are marrying a janitor? My mother scoffed. Her voice was not just loud, it was dripping with a venom so pure, so refined, it actually made my stomach turn into hard knots. Have you just given up on life, Maeve? Are you trying to humiliate us on purpose? I stood there in the center of my small living room, 32 years old, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. On the coffee table in front of me sat a neat, agonizing stack of 86 heavy cardstock envelopes. 86 invitations sent out to aunts, uncles, cousins, and the people who shared my blood. 0 Rsvps returned. Not a single one. My whole family boycotted my wedding because I chose to love a man who wore a blue uniform and pushed a cleaning cart for a living. They coordinated a mass silent treatment to punish me, forcing me to walk down the aisle alone. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to stand at the altar and weep for their approval. But my toxic family had no idea that just hours after I said my vows, their phones would explode. They had no idea that a 12-second video clip from my hyper-private coastal wedding would go viral across the entire internet. And they had no clue that the caption on that video would reveal exactly who my husband really was, turning their lavish, fake high society lives into a pile of worthless ash. Before I tell you how this entire family dug their own graves, let me know where you are watching this video from in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members who only valued you for your status? Hit that like button and subscribe if you know what it feels like to finally walk away. Growing up in Boston, Massachusetts, I learned very early that love in my household came with a steep, unpayable price tag. My name is Maeve. I work as a financial risk analyst at a massive corporate firm right in the heart of the city. I am quiet, I am practical, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the perpetual scapegoat of a family aggressively obsessed with status. My parents, Alistair and Veda, do not measure a person by their character, their kindness, or their integrity. They measure human worth strictly by their zip code, the brand of their watch, and their job title. My father, Alistair, is a commercial real estate broker. He worships money with a religious fervor. To him, every single human interaction is a networking opportunity, and every relationship is a calculated transaction. He walks into rooms expecting everyone to cater to his ego, wearing tailored suits that cost more than my monthly rent. My mother, Veda, treats high society like a competitive blood sport. She spends her days attending charity luncheons she does not care about, purely to ensure she is seen rubbing elbows with the right wives of the right executives. She speaks in backhanded compliments and judges everyone who does not carry a designer handbag. In their eyes, my modest salary, my sensible car, and my quiet lifestyle made me a spectacular failure. I was a stain on their carefully curated image. This unbearable dynamic was only magnified by my younger sister, Imogen. At 29 years old, Imogen is the undisputed golden child of the family. She never heard the word no. She never faced a consequence. Imogen married a flashy, loud-mouthed crypto fund manager named Bastian, and together, they became my parents' favorite trophies to parade around town. Bastian loves to flaunt his leased luxury vehicles and oversized designer watches. He constantly talks down to anyone who works a regular 9-to-5 job, acting as though his digital money made him a god among peasants. He wears overwhelming cologne, talks over everyone at the dinner table, and treats service workers like garbage. Whenever the family gathered for holidays or mandatory Sunday dinners, I was merely the stepping stone they used to elevate their own perceived greatness. I was the punchline to their cruel jokes. I was the baseline of failure they compared themselves against to feel better about their own shallow lives. Because of this deeply toxic environment, I learned to keep the things that mattered most to me entirely hidden in the shadows. If they did not know about it, they could not destroy it. That included my love life. But in a family that thrives on gossip and tearing others down, secrets never stay buried for long. My silence was a ticking time bomb, and the explosion was inevitable. To understand why my family's betrayal over my wedding hurt so deeply, you have to look at the long, miserable history of how they treated me. I call it my mental museum of pain. Every exhibit is a vivid, burning memory of being pushed aside. The first exhibit is my college graduation. I worked multiple part-time jobs to put myself through a rigorous finance program because my father refused to pay for a degree he deemed unglamorous. He told me that risk analysis was for beta workers, not leaders. On the day I graduated with top honors, the weather was suffocatingly hot. I stood in my heavy black cap and gown outside the auditorium, waiting for my family to arrive. I watched other students hugging their proud parents, taking endless photographs. I waited for 2 hours. My phone went straight to voicemail every time I called. They never showed up. When I finally took the city bus home, clutching my diploma, feeling utterly empty, I found them all in the driveway of our suburban home. Imogen had accidentally scratched the paint on my father's new Porsche while trying to park her own car. My mother was busy consoling a weeping Imogen, telling her it was not her fault, wiping tears from her flawless makeup. My father was frantically calling a luxury auto body shop, his face red with stress. When I walked up the driveway in my graduation gown, my mother just glanced at me and sighed. She told me we would have to skip my celebratory dinner because Imogen was simply too traumatized by the car scratch. My 4 years of relentless hard work, late-night studying, and financial struggle were erased by a minor paint scuff on a sports car. The second exhibit happened a few years later. I had finally saved up enough money to buy a reliable, used sedan. It was not flashy. The paint was a bit dull, but I bought it with my own money, and I was incredibly proud of it. It represented my independence. One evening, I stopped by my father's real estate office to drop off some paperwork he had requested. He was standing in the parking lot with a high-profile commercial client, trying to close a massive deal. When I pulled up in my humble sedan, the engine sputtering slightly, the client smiled politely and asked if I was his daughter. My father let out a harsh, booming laugh. He actually pointed at my car and told the client, "Yes, this is Maeve. She is going through a phase where she pretends to be working class. It is terribly embarrassing, but we hope she outgrows it soon." I sat behind the steering wheel, my face burning with a fiery, suffocating humiliation while the two men chuckled. He degraded my independence and mocked my financial reality just to score a cheap laugh with a wealthy stranger. The third exhibit was a dress. My sister Imogen was attending a lavish charity gala and claimed she had nothing to wear, despite having a closet bursting with expensive clothes. She walked into my apartment uninvited, went straight into my bedroom, and pulled out a stunning, deep emerald silk dress I had bought for myself months prior. I had saved up for it and was keeping it for a special occasion. I told her no. I told her I bought it for myself. Imogen threw a massive tantrum, calling me selfish and pathetic. 30 minutes later, my mother called. Veda did not ask. She demanded. She told me I was being petty and jealous of my sister's active social life. She said I had nowhere important to go anyway, so keeping the dress was just plain spiteful. The emotional pressure was immense. I handed the dress over to Imogen that afternoon. She wore it, spilled red wine all down the front of the delicate silk, and handed it back to me in a plastic grocery bag the next day without a single word of apology. These were not isolated incidents. This was the daily, agonizing reality of my existence. It is exactly why I became a risk analyst. I chose a career immersed in data, spreadsheets, and probability because numbers do not lie. Numbers do not play favorites. Numbers do not tell you that you are less valuable because you do not wear designer labels. I sought comfort in logic because my family environment was a chaotic nightmare of emotional manipulation. I built thick walls around my heart, determined to never let them see me bleed again. But no matter how thick the walls are, you still hope, deep down, that maybe one day your family will wake up and see your worth. That foolish sliver of hope is what ultimately set the stage for the most brutal heartbreak of my life. I met Declan when I was 31 years old. He worked as a maintenance man and janitor at the towering corporate financial building where my firm was located. Every morning, I would arrive at the office at 6 a.m. to beat the chaotic city traffic and get a head start on my massive workload. And every morning, I would walk past swarms of arrogant finance executives in $1,000 suits who treated the support staff like invisible ghosts. They would drop coffee cups on the pristine marble floor and keep walking, assuming someone beneath them would clean it up without a word of complaint. But Declan caught my attention immediately. He wore a standard-issue blue canvas uniform. He pushed a heavy gray utility cart filled with cleaning supplies, wrenches, and mops. Yet, there was an incredible, grounded confidence in the way he carried himself. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sharp, observant eyes that seemed to take in every tiny detail of the bustling lobby. He did not shrink away or lower his head when the wealthy executives barked orders. He simply went about his work with a quiet, powerful dignity that fascinated me. One morning, the industrial espresso machine in our break room broke down. I was standing there in a mild state of panic, desperately needing caffeine before a massive risk assessment meeting, when Declan walked in with his heavy tool belt. We started talking. I expected a brief exchange about the weather or the broken machine. Instead, I found myself utterly captivated. His vocabulary was incredibly sharp. We ended up discussing global market trends and the psychology of corporate greed while he dismantled the espresso machine with practiced ease. He listened to me with genuine, focused interest, offering insights that were smarter than half the senior analysts on my floor. There was a profound peace about him. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the loud, boastful men in my family who constantly needed to prove their dominance. I fell in love with his mind first, then his heart. I was entirely unbothered by the blue uniform, the calloused hands, or the name on his paycheck. As we started dating, I made a very conscious, deliberate decision to keep Declan a secret from my parents and my sister. It was not because I was ashamed of his job. I was deeply, intensely ashamed of my family. I knew exactly how my mother Veda would react to a man who earned an hourly wage cleaning up other people's messes. I knew my brother-in-law Bastian would make degrading, cruel jokes about Declan's uniform, and my father would relentlessly interrogate him about his lack of a real career. I wanted to protect Declan from their elitist judgments. For months, we lived in our own beautiful, peaceful bubble. We enjoyed quiet dinners at small neighborhood diners and took long weekend hikes along the rugged coastline, far away from the judging eyes of my bloodline. But hiding anything in my family is like trying to hold water in your bare hands. Imogen has always been incredibly nosy, always looking for a weakness to exploit. She noticed I was skipping the mandatory Sunday family brunches, making up excuses about heavy workloads. One Tuesday afternoon, while shopping downtown with her wealthy friends, she spotted me having lunch at a sidewalk cafe. I was sitting across from Declan. He was wearing his blue maintenance uniform, his name tag clearly visible on his chest. Imogen did not come over to say hello. She did not introduce herself. Instead, she stood across the street, pulled out her phone, and zoomed in. She took a photo of us holding hands over the small cafe table and immediately sent it to our mother. The phone call from Veda came right as I was finishing a complex data report that evening. My mother did not ask how my day was. She launched straight into a targeted interrogation. "Imogen tells me you are dating the help," Veda said, her voice dripping with pure disgust. "A maintenance guy, Maeve? Are you intentionally trying to humiliate us?" I gripped the edge of my desk, my heart racing. I told her my personal life was none of her business. But Veda was relentless. She demanded that I bring my mystery man to the mandatory family dinner that coming weekend. I refused, knowing exactly what kind of firing squad she was assembling. But my mother delivered an icy ultimatum. "You will bring him to dinner on Saturday, Maeve, or I will drive down to your office lobby tomorrow morning and introduce myself to him while he is scrubbing the floors. You know I will do it. Do not embarrass us any further." I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. She would cause a massive, humiliating scene at my workplace just to assert control. I had no choice but to agree. The countdown to a disaster had officially begun. Saturday evening arrived with the creeping, suffocating dread of an impending execution. I paced the hardwood floors of my small apartment, nervously smoothing out the wrinkles in my modest beige dress. Declan sat on the edge of my sofa, watching my frantic pacing with that same unnerving tranquility he always possessed. I had spent the entire week briefing him on the psychological minefield he was about to step into. I warned him about Bastion's arrogant bragging and my father's ruthless interrogations. I even told him we could just skip town and ignore them, but Declan just smiled, took my hand, and said he could handle a simple family dinner. Unbeknownst to me, Declan had already made a silent decision. He was going to use this dinner to test my family's true character. He wanted to see exactly how the people who shared my blood would treat a man they believed was entirely beneath them. The drive to my parents' estate felt like a prolonged death march. We pulled up to the sprawling McMansion, its massive stone facade standing as a loud testament to my father's obsession with wealth. Bastion's sleek, leased sports car was parked directly in the center of the driveway, a glaring indicator that the golden couple had arrived. We walked up the sweeping brick pathway together, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. The moment we stepped into the grand foyer, the oppressive scent of expensive lilies and sheer pretension washed over me. The house was designed to intimidate, not welcome. From the formal living room, the sound of loud, boastful laughter echoed. We walked toward the noise. Imogen was holding court on a velvet sofa, dripping in designer labels that screamed new money. Beside her stood Bastion, wearing a razor-sharp custom suit, loudly bragging about his crypto investments to my father, who was nodding with greedy approval. When we entered the room, the boastful laughter died instantly. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased. Everyone froze, their eyes locking onto Declan. I had expected him to wear a nice button-down shirt or a casual blazer to blend in. But Declan had not changed. He stepped fully into the harsh glare of the crystal chandelier wearing his actual, standard-issue blue maintenance uniform. The heavy boots, the canvas pants, the name tag pinned to his chest. He looked like he had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift. The silence in the room stretched so tight I thought the air itself might snap. My mother Veda was the first to react. She let out a sharp, audible gasp, her eyes darting from Declan's work boots up to his face. Her features contorted into a mask of pure revulsion, as if someone had just tracked mud onto her pristine white rugs. Declan, entirely unbothered by the icy reception, extended a polite, steady hand toward her. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and deeply resonant. Veda actually took a physical step backward. "I would prefer not to shake hands," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I do not know what kind of dirt or chemicals you pick up plunging toilets all day." I felt my face flush with hot, consuming shame. Before I could speak, Bastion erupted into a booming, theatrical laugh. "Oh, this is rich," Bastion wheezed, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "Maeve, you really brought the hired help to a family dinner. Tell me, man, what is the going rate for mopping floors these days? $15 an hour? Do they at least give you a discount on window cleaner?" My father Alistair stood up, buttoning his expensive jacket, looking down his nose at Declan. "Let us skip the pleasantries," my father snapped. "You are standing in my home wearing a uniform that belongs in a supply closet. When exactly do you plan to get a real career? Because if you think I am going to let a daughter of mine date a man who cannot even afford a mortgage, you are out of your mind. I have a reputation in the commercial real estate world. I cannot have my associates knowing my daughter's boyfriend unclogs drains for a living." The cruelty was so blatant, so unapologetically raw, that tears of angry humiliation pricked my eyes. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. But as I looked at Declan, I realized he did not flinch. He did not look intimidated. He looked profoundly disappointed. "I find a lot of value in maintaining a solid foundation," Declan said, his tone remarkably smooth and controlled. He turned his gaze directly to Bastion, locking eyes with the flashy fund manager. "Speaking of foundations, Bastion, I read the recent market reports on the crypto sector. With the extreme volatility, the lack of tangible liquidity, and the looming threat of federal regulations, how is your fund managing the risk? It must be incredibly stressful building a luxury lifestyle on unbacked digital coins that can lose half their value overnight. I imagine you are constantly looking over your shoulder, hoping the bubble does not burst before the feds audit your accounts." The air in the room vanished. Bastion's arrogant smile dissolved instantly, replaced by a flash of genuine, wide-eyed panic. For a split second, the loud crypto manager looked exactly like a cornered animal. He shifted his weight nervously, pulling at the collar of his suit. My father frowned, clearly unsettled that a janitor possessed the vocabulary and market awareness to casually dissect his favorite son-in-law's financial stability. Imogen scoffed loudly to break the suffocating tension. "How dare you come into our house and question my husband?" she snapped, her voice shrill. "You are just a janitor. You know nothing about real money." That was it. That was the limit of what I could endure. I stepped directly in front of Declan, placing myself between him and my toxic family. "Do not speak to him like that," I demanded, my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for 32 years. "He has more class, more intelligence, and more integrity in his little finger than all of you combined." "Maeve, lower your voice." My father barked, his face turning an angry shade of red. "No," I fired back, standing my ground. "I am done sitting quietly while you measure human worth by bank accounts. Declan is a good man. If you cannot see that, then I have nothing left to say to any of you." I grabbed Declan's hand. His grip was warm and steady. I pulled him toward the door, not looking back. As we reached the entryway, my mother screamed through the foyer, echoing violently off the marble floors. "Walk out that door and you are dead to us," Beta shrieked. "You are an embarrassment to this family." I pushed the heavy door open and walked out into the cool evening air, leaving their poison behind us. But the war had only just begun. In the months following that disastrous dinner, my family treated my existence as a shameful secret. My mother stopped calling. My father sent no emails. Imogen only updated her social media to showcase Bastion's latest luxury car leases, pretending I did not exist. I welcomed the exile. It gave Declan and me the space to build a life founded on mutual respect rather than a continuous calculation of net worth. For months later, during a quiet weekend hike along a secluded coastal trail, Declan asked me to marry him. There were no elaborate flash mobs or expensive photographers hired to capture content for social media clout. Just the crashing waves, the salty ocean breeze, and a simple, elegant gold band. It was unpretentious, devoid of the massive diamonds my family considered mandatory for social survival. I said yes, feeling a massive surge of happiness that eclipsed the lingering sting of my family's rejection. That evening, holding a foolish, stubborn sliver of hope, I posted a picture of my hand resting in Declan's in the extended family group chat. I announced our engagement and set the wedding date for June 12th. I pressed send and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 30. I watched the read receipts populate on my screen in real time. Read by Veda. Read by Alistair. Read by Imogen. The names stacked up in a neat, damning row confirming that every single member of my bloodline had seen the announcement. Yet, no one typed a response. Not a single thumbs-up emoji. The entire family silently agreed to freeze me out, sending a unified, unmistakable message that my happiness meant nothing to them. Less than 48 hours later, I received a demanding text from my father. "Be at my office at noon. Do not be late." I walked into his massive corner office in the financial district. The reception area was a monument to corporate excess, lined with imported Italian marble. Alistair did not greet me. He just stared at me with the cold, calculating gaze of a man evaluating a terrible investment. He unlocked his desk drawer, pulled out a sleek leather-bound business checkbook, and quickly scratched his expensive fountain pen across the paper. He tore the check with a swift motion and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. I looked down at the crisp piece of paper. The amount was written in bold, unmistakable ink. $50,000. "Take it," Alistair commanded, crossing his arms over his chest. "That is $50,000. That is more money than your boyfriend makes in 2 years of pushing a mop. It is a buyout. You are going to take that money, and you are going to cancel this ridiculous June 12th wedding." I stared at the check, my blood running cold. What is this for? If you are dead set on ruining your life with a man who has zero ambition and zero capital, fine, my father continued, his voice dripping with intense condescension. That is your funeral. But you will not drag my reputation down with you. Cancel the public ceremony. Elope in secret, go to a dingy courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon where none of my associates or country club friends will ever have to see it. If my elite clients find out my future son-in-law is a blue-collar wage worker, I will be the laughingstock of the commercial real estate sector. He honestly believed everyone on Earth had a price. He had calculated the exact price tag for my dignity. I reached out and picked up the check. I saw the triumphant, deeply arrogant smirk begin to form at the corners of his mouth. Then, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the man who raised me, I pulled my hands in opposite directions. The sharp, decisive rip of the thick paper echoed like a gunshot in the silent office. Alistair sat frozen, his smug expression instantly paralyzing. I put the two halves together and tore them again and again. I let the shredded confetti of his desperate bribe flutter down onto his desk. "You do not have enough money in the world to buy my self-respect," I said, my voice eerily calm against the backdrop of his rising horror. "I am marrying Declan on June 12th. I am not hiding in a dingy courthouse." The transition from shock to unhinged fury was instantaneous. Alistair shot up from his chair so violently it slammed into the glass wall behind him. He slammed both fists onto the desk. "You ungrateful, pathetic little fool," he roared. "I am trying to save this family from the massive humiliation of your choices. If you walk out of this office today, you are cut off." I did not flinch. "I do not want your money, Dad. I never did." He pointed a trembling, furious finger at my face. "I will personally make sure every single relative knows exactly what kind of trashy event you are throwing. I will call them myself. I will make it clear that anyone who attends your pathetic little party is dead to Veda and me. We will see how brave you feel when you are walking down the aisle to a completely empty room." I turned on my heel and walked out. I had just been formally disowned. If it were you, would you have taken the $50,000 and walked away? Drop a comment below and let me know. Because what my family did next was beyond pure evil. The suffocating silence in the family group chat finally broke at 8 o'clock the next morning. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A naive, desperate part of me thought someone had finally mustered the decency to offer a belated congratulation. Instead, I opened the notification to find a deliberate, calculated act of sabotage. Imogen had uploaded a digital invitation dripping with ostentatious gold foil graphics. The bold text read, "Bastion and Imogen formally invite you to an evening of opulence to celebrate their 5-year vow renewal." My eyes darted to the details. The venue was the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most exclusive, astronomically expensive ballroom in the city. Then I saw the date. June 12th. The exact same day I had just announced for my wedding. It was not a scheduling oversight. It was a direct, targeted assassination of my wedding day. Before I could even process the sheer cruelty of it, the group chat erupted. The same family members who had ignored my engagement announcement suddenly found their keyboards. My mother responded within seconds, typing out a string of celebratory emojis, declaring it would be the event of the season. Aunts, uncles, and cousins flooded the chat with ecstatic Rsvps and fawning praise. My simple announcement of a new life with Declan was buried under a digital avalanche of excitement for a fake, manufactured anniversary party. I bypassed the group chat, tapped Imogen's contact, and hit the call button. She answered with a smug, artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. "You scheduled a vow renewal on the exact day I just announced for my wedding," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Are you actually doing this, Imogen?" She let out a short, dismissive sigh. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maeve. The Grand Plaza only had that specific Saturday available." "You have been married for exactly 3.5 years," I shot back, gripping the edge of the counter. "It is not even your 5-year anniversary. This is a complete fabrication designed to force the family to choose between us." Her tone shifted instantly, the fake sweetness dropping away to reveal the cold, calculating panic underneath. "Listen to me," she hissed. "This is business. Bastion's crypto fund is taking a massive hit right now. We are hosting this gala to project wealth. He is trying to secure a multi-million-dollar bailout from elite investors. We need the room packed with our family looking like a dynasty. We cannot have half the guest list wandering off to attend some budget wedding for a janitor." She fully expected me to cave, to quietly change my date and fade into the background so her husband could secure his desperate financial lifeline. Instead, I felt an incredible sense of clarity. "I am keeping my date, Imogen," I said softly. "I am not moving my wedding to protect your fragile image." She scoffed loudly into the receiver. "Fine. Make a fool of yourself. But do not come crying to me when you are walking down the aisle to empty chairs." She hung up. I spent the next evening at my small kitchen table methodically addressing 86 plain, cream-colored envelopes. I dropped the entire batch into the postal box the next morning, essentially launching a silent plea to my extended family to choose love over my parents' toxic ultimatums. The response was an absolute bloodbath. A few days later, the RSVP cards began to trickle back into my mailbox. Every single afternoon became a miserable ritual of dread. I would pull out handfuls of envelopes, carry them upstairs, and tear them open one by one. Every single card bore a harsh, unforgiving checkmark slashed aggressively into the box labeled "Declines with regret." 10 rejections. 30. 50. The small stack of heavy paper sitting on my coffee table grew into a towering monument to my isolation. But simply checking a box was not enough for my family. They needed to twist the knife. My Aunt Patricia called me. She did not bother asking how wedding planning was going. She just said her husband needed to network with Bastion's wealthy investors, and they could not miss a high society event at the Grand Plaza just to eat cheap catered chicken in a backyard at my little party. My cousin Bradley texted to say Alistair had threatened to blacklist anyone who attended my wedding from his real estate deals, and he could not risk his career over a guy wearing a cleaning badge. By the end of the second week, the psychological toll began to crush me. I stopped sleeping. I lost my appetite. That afternoon, the mail carrier dropped off the final batch of envelopes. I lined them up on the kitchen island, meticulously counting them. 84. 85. 86. I was left with exactly 0 RSVPs. Not a single rogue cousin, not one sympathetic aunt willing to defy my parents' mandate. My family had effectively orchestrated a total blackout of my existence, erasing me from the family tree simply because the man I loved scrubbed floors instead of trading stocks. The numbness that had protected me finally cracked, shattering into a million jagged pieces. I sank to the kitchen floor, pulling my knees to my chest, and let out a raw, agonizing sob. The tears came fast and violent. I cried for the little girl who was never enough, and for the bride who was deemed too embarrassing to celebrate. Hearing my sobs, Declan rushed into the kitchen. He saw the final stack of returned cards lined up on the counter. He understood immediately. He dropped to his knees beside me on the cold tile, gathering my shaking frame into his strong arms. He held me tight, pressing my face against his chest. "Let them go," Declan murmured, his tone steady and unbothered by the rejection of 86 people. "They have shown you exactly who they are, and they do not deserve a single seat at your table. You do not need a ballroom full of shallow opportunists to validate your worth." I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears, feeling utterly defeated. "I am going to walk down the aisle completely alone," I whispered. Declan gently tilted my chin up, making me look directly into his dark, unwavering eyes. "I promise you," he said, wiping a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "When you walk down that aisle, the room will not be empty. You are going to have a beautiful wedding, and you will never have to look back at these people again." Thank you so much for watching this far. If you are invested in seeing how my toxic family gets exactly what they deserve, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like right now. The revenge is just getting started. The morning of June 12th arrived with brilliant, unapologetic sunshine pouring through my bedroom blinds. I opened my eyes to an apartment that was entirely too quiet. There was no mother bursting through my door with garment bags and unsolicited criticism. There was no sister popping champagne corks, demanding the spotlight while pretending to celebrate me. For a fleeting, agonizing second, the heavy hollow ache of their massive boycott pressed against my chest. But as I sat up and looked at the simple, beautiful white gown hanging on my closet door, the ache dissolved into a profound sense of peace. I was marrying the man who had held me together when my own bloodline tore me apart. A sharp knock at my front door broke the silence. I hurried down the hall and pulled it open to find Talia and Orla, two data analysts from my division, standing on my welcome mat. They were holding massive iced coffees, a box of fresh pastries, and garment bags of their own. They had taken the entire day off just to be my makeshift bridal party. "We are not letting you get ready alone," Talia announced, marching into the kitchen and setting down the coffee. "We brought hairspray, waterproof mascara, and an absolute refusal to let anyone ruin today." I pulled them both into a tight hug, incredibly grateful for the family I had chosen over the family I was assigned. The next 3 hours were filled with genuine, effortless joy. Orla curled my hair into soft waves while Talia carefully applied my makeup, keeping up a steady stream of jokes to keep my nerves at bay. There were no arguments over centerpieces or petty comments about the cost of my veil. It was just pure, unadulterated support. When I finally slipped into my wedding dress, a sleek minimalist ivory gown without the heavy restrictive layers my mother would have demanded, I looked in the mirror and recognized myself. I was not a prop in a corporate real estate scheme. I was a bride. It was time to head to the venue. Declan and I had originally agreed to rent a standard black town car for the afternoon. Nothing flashy, just a clean, reliable ride to get me to the chapel while he went ahead to handle the setup. Talia and Orla gathered my train, and we took the elevator down to the lobby of my apartment building. I pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping out onto the busy Boston sidewalk, expecting to see a standard sedan waiting at the curb. I stopped dead in my tracks. Parked illegally right in front of my building was a massive, midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom. It was not just a luxury vehicle. It looked like a mobile fortress. The glass on the windows was several inches thick, carrying the unmistakable heavy tint of armored, bulletproof paneling. The sleek, imposing vehicle commanded the entire street, making the passing city traffic seem entirely insignificant. A man standing next to the rear passenger door immediately snapped to attention as I walked out. He was not a standard chauffeur. He was built like a heavyweight boxer wearing a sharply tailored dark suit, tactical sunglasses, and a coiled earpiece trailing down his neck. His posture was rigid, exuding a level of intense military professionalism that felt completely out of place on my modest residential street. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the man said, his voice deep and authoritative. He reached out and opened the heavy armored door with a smooth, practiced motion. I stood on the sidewalk, completely bewildered, clutching my bouquet of white roses. I looked at Talia and Orla, whose jaws were practically hitting the pavement. They stared at the million-dollar vehicle, then stared back at me with wide, questioning eyes. "I think there has been a mistake," I told the driver, taking a hesitant step back toward the lobby doors. "We only booked a standard rental. I am looking for a regular town car under my name." The driver pressed 2 fingers against his earpiece, listening intently for a moment. He gave a sharp, singular nod. "No mistake, ma'am," he replied smoothly. "Sir requested that we ensure you arrive at the venue with the highest level of security and comfort. The perimeter is secure, and we are ready for departure whenever you are." "Sir." The formal, highly disciplined way he referred to Declan sent a wave of utter confusion washing over me. Since when did janitors have armored vehicles and private security details at their disposal? The level of respect this massive, intimidating man was showing toward a maintenance worker simply did not make any logical sense. I climbed into the cavernous, leather-lined interior of the Rolls-Royce, sinking into the plush seats as the heavy bulletproof door shut behind me with a solid airtight thud. The cabin was completely silent, insulated entirely from the city noise outside. Talia and Orla slid into the opposite seats, running their hands over the pristine upholstery in absolute awe. Just as the massive engine purred to life, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out to find a new text message from Declan. I stared at the bright screen, reading his words over and over again, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in reality. "I know the ride is a little over the top," Declan wrote. "A generous old buddy of mine owed me a massive favor and insisted on lending me his car for the day. Just sit back, relax, and let them bring you to me. I cannot wait to see you." I locked my phone, my heart racing with a strange, thrilling anticipation. My family was busy preparing for a fake gala across town to appease a desperate crypto market, entirely convinced I was riding in a budget rental to a cheap backyard party. They had absolutely no idea what kind of world I was actually driving into. The heavy bulletproof doors of the Rolls-Royce insulated us completely from the outside world. As the driver navigated through downtown Boston, I sat back against the pristine leather, expecting him to take the familiar northbound exit toward the modest, affordable chapel I had booked months ago. Instead, the vehicle glided seamlessly onto the highway leading toward the exclusive North Shore coastline. "Wait," I said, leaning forward and tapping the glass partition. "We missed the exit for the chapel." The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression entirely stoic. "Sir requested a change of venue, ma'am. He assured me you would be pleased with the upgrade." Talia and Orla exchanged thrilled, wide-eyed glances next to me. I sat back, my mind racing. A change of venue. Declan and I had carefully budgeted for that small chapel. We had meticulously counted every dollar. Now I was speeding away from the city in a $1 million armored fortress heading toward an unknown destination. After 40 minutes of driving along winding coastal roads, the dense tree line suddenly broke to reveal the sprawling, breathtaking expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The Rolls-Royce slowed as we approached a massive wrought iron gate embedded in a towering stone wall. This was not a public event space. It was a hyper-private, ultra-exclusive coastal estate, the kind of property owned by old money dynasties or tech billionaires who valued absolute seclusion. The security presence at the perimeter was staggering. At least half a dozen men dressed in tactical black suits, all wearing coiled earpieces and dark sunglasses, guarded the heavy gates. They operated with a cold military precision that made the hair on my arms stand up. Our driver rolled down his window, presenting a digital clearance code on a tablet. One of the guards inspected it, gave a sharp nod, and signaled for the massive gates to slowly swing open. As the vehicle crunched onto the pristine gravel driveway, the full scale of the estate came into view. A magnificent, sprawling stone mansion sat perched directly on the coastal cliffs, completely hidden from the public road. The manicured lawns stretched for acres, leading down to a private beach. But what truly stole my breath was the sight of a sleek black private helicopter resting on a designated helipad near the edge of the property. The rotors were still slowly spinning, indicating a very recent arrival. "This cannot be real," Orla whispered, pressing her face against the tinted glass. "Maeve, who exactly are you marrying?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly completely dry. "I honestly do not know anymore." The driver pulled up to the grand entrance of the estate. The heavy doors were immediately opened by estate staff waiting to escort us inside. I stepped out of the vehicle, my simple white dress fluttering in the sharp, salty ocean breeze. Talia and Orla followed closely behind me, entirely speechless. A severe-looking woman holding an encrypted tablet greeted me at the door, her demeanor highly efficient. "Good afternoon, ma'am. The groom is waiting in the conservatory. The guests are already seated on the ocean terrace. Please follow me." I walked through the cavernous halls of the mansion, my footsteps echoing against imported marble floors. The sheer opulence of the home was dizzying, making my parents' suburban McMansion look like a cheap, tacky imitation. We were led toward a set of massive French doors that opened up to a breathtaking terrace overlooking the crashing waves of the Atlantic. The ceremony space was stunningly minimalist, designed to highlight the raw natural beauty of the ocean rather than compete with it. There were no extravagant, towering floral arrangements like the ones my mother would have demanded. Instead, a simple arch of white orchids stood against the horizon. I looked toward the seating area, expecting to see a reasonable crowd of Declan's friends and family. Instead, my eyes scanned exactly 12 chairs arranged in a single, neat row on his side of the aisle. 12 guests. That was it. But as I observed the men occupying those seats, a deep, primal realization washed over me. These were no ordinary friends. The atmosphere they created was thick with intense, intimidating power. They were not wearing off-the-rack suits. Every single man was dressed in bespoke, custom-tailored garments that screamed quiet, unfathomable wealth. They carried themselves with an apex predator confidence, radiating the kind of absolute authority that commanded boardrooms and governments. One man, older with sharp silver hair, was quietly checking a secure government-issued satellite phone. Another was speaking in hushed, intense tones to a personal security detail hovering just out of sight. I recognized his face from a recent financial magazine cover featuring the titans of the tech industry. These were men who moved global markets, shaped legislation, and commanded private armies. They were the very elite my father spent his entire pathetic life trying to impress. And they were all sitting in quiet, respectful silence, waiting for a man they seemingly revered. The extreme, jarring contrast between the $15 an hour janitor facade and the reality unfolding before my eyes was completely overwhelming. Declan plunged toilets. He ate packed lunches in a break room. Yet he commanded the absolute loyalty of billionaires, politicians, and military figures who had flown private helicopters to a heavily guarded coastal fortress just to watch him get married. My family had boycotted this wedding because they believed they were protecting their brand from a low-class disaster. They had chosen to attend an artificial, desperate networking gala at the Grand Plaza, mocking my modest choices. They were so utterly blinded by their own arrogant superiority that they had no idea I was about to marry a man who held more power in his little finger than their entire social circle combined. I stood at the edge of the terrace, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The music began to play, a soft, haunting cello melody that blended perfectly with the sound of the crashing ocean waves. I tightened my grip on my bouquet, took a deep, fortifying breath, and prepared to step out into the sunlight. The sunlight hit my face as I crossed the threshold onto the ocean terrace. I looked down the short, pristine aisle. There was no father waiting to take my arm. Alistair had made his choice, trading his oldest daughter for a fleeting moment of high society validation. He genuinely believed that stripping away his presence would leave me a broken, weeping mess. But as I took my first step forward, the absence of his hand on my arm did not feel like a loss. It felt like absolute liberation. I walked down that aisle entirely alone, my head held high, my shoulders squared beneath the delicate fabric of my gown. Every step I took was a conscious, deliberate unchaining from 32 years of toxic expectations. I was not a castaway. I was an independent woman walking toward the life I had chosen, leaving the wreckage of my bloodline far behind me. The 12 men seated on either side of the aisle watched me in complete, respectful silence. There were no judgmental whispers, no snide evaluations of my dress or my worth. These titans of industry simply offered quiet nods of deep respect as I passed. Halfway down the aisle, the traditional rules of a wedding dissolved. Declan did not wait for me at the altar. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, meeting me right in the middle of the terrace. My breath caught sharply in my throat as I looked at him. The man approaching me was not wearing a blue uniform or a plastic name tag. He was wearing a masterfully crafted, custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his athletic frame with razor-sharp precision. The cut of the dark fabric accentuated his broad shoulders and commanding presence. He looked like an apex predator who had finally removed his disguise. The sheer, undeniable power radiating from him was intoxicating. He offered me his arm, his dark eyes filled with an intense, unwavering devotion that anchored me to the earth. Taking his hand, the facade of the humble maintenance worker completely vanished, replaced entirely by the reality of a billionaire CEO who bowed to no one. We walked the rest of the way together, stopping beneath the minimalist arch of white orchids. When it was time for our vows, Declan spoke first, his voice deep and resonant. He did not just promise to love me. He promised to shield me, to stand as an unbreakable fortress between me and anyone who ever tried to make me feel small again. He confessed his truth right there on the altar. He was the founder and CEO of Cross Global Group, the most powerful cybersecurity and private defense firm in the world. He had taken the maintenance job undercover for 6 months to personally audit the physical vulnerabilities of his own corporate headquarters. And in doing so, he had found me. When it was my turn, my voice trembled slightly, but not from fear. I looked into the eyes of the man who had deliberately disguised his immense wealth to test the character of the world, and I promised to be a sanctuary, just as he had been mine. I promised that our love would always be built on absolute truth, completely unbothered by the superficial noise of status and hollow prestige. Then came the moment that would permanently alter the trajectory of my entire family's existence. Declan reached into his breast pocket and produced the wedding band. It was not the simple, understated gold ring he had proposed with. It was a breathtaking, flawless diamond band that caught the coastal sunlight in a blinding array of prismatic fire. As he lifted my left hand to slide the ring onto my finger, a subtle movement in the front row caught my peripheral vision. Magnus, a famously ruthless venture capitalist whose face regularly graced the covers of global business journals, leaned forward in his seat. He pulled out a sleek smartphone, bypassing the professional photographer we had hired. With a quiet, deliberate precision, Magnus hit record. For exactly 12 seconds, the high-definition camera captured a flawless cinematic sequence. It recorded the breathtaking backdrop of the Atlantic Ocean, the towering, unmistakable presence of Declan Cross in his bespoke tuxedo, and the raw, unshielded emotion on his face as he slid the massive diamond onto my finger. It captured the extreme, undeniable wealth of the coastal estate, proving that the most powerful man in the cybersecurity world was pledging his life to me in a hyper-private ceremony. Magnus lowered his phone, tapping the screen a few times with a highly satisfied smirk before slipping the device back into his tailored suit jacket. I did not know it then, but those 12 seconds of digital footage were already silently uploading to the cloud, preparing to detonate across the internet. I leaned in as Declan leaned down, our lips meeting in a kiss that sealed our future. Across the city, in a gaudy ballroom packed with desperate opportunists, my parents and my sister were entirely oblivious that their fake, manufactured kingdom was about to be burned to the ground by the very man they had relentlessly mocked. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom was a suffocating display of manufactured prestige. Every square inch of the sprawling event space was draped in imported white silk and dripping with ostentatious crystal light fixtures. Waiters in pristine white tuxedos navigated the polished marble floors, carrying silver trays loaded with premium champagne and expensive caviar. It was a monument to desperation disguised as luxury, funded by money that did not actually exist. Imogen moved through the dense crowd of high society guests like a monarch holding court. She wore a heavy, custom-designed gown entirely encrusted with crystals that caught the flashing lights of the hired photographers. She soaked up the attention with a greedy, bottomless appetite, completely convinced she was the undisputed queen of the city. Near the towering ice sculpture at the center of the room, Bastian was fighting for his financial life. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, and a faint sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He was surrounded by a tight, skeptical circle of elite venture capitalists and prominent tech investors he had lured to the party under false pretenses. He held a glass of expensive bourbon, using his booming voice and aggressive charisma to mask the absolute panic clawing at his chest. His crypto fund was hemorrhaging capital, facing imminent collapse and potential federal scrutiny. The digital market is just experiencing a standard temporary correction, Bastian boomed, flashing his blinding diamond watch as he gestured broadly. Weak hands are selling, but smart money knows this is the perfect time to consolidate. In fact, my fund is in the final stages of securing a massive, game-changing strategic partnership. The investors murmured among themselves, their expressions guarded. One of the older venture capitalists raised an eyebrow, demanding to know who was foolish enough to inject capital into a sinking crypto portfolio. Bastian leaned in close, lowering his voice conspiratorially to ensure his lie carried the maximum amount of weight. Cross-Global Group, Bastian stated, dropping the name like a massive, heavy anchor. The investors visibly reacted, their eyes widening at the mention of the apex predator of the cybersecurity world. Their CEO, Declan Cross, and I are practically on a first-name basis. The capital injection is entirely guaranteed. Across the massive ballroom, my father Alistair was executing his own desperate hustle. He had cornered a group of powerful commercial landlords and property magnates near the extravagant dessert buffet. His real estate brokerage was teetering on the edge of ruin, desperately relying on a lease renewal that was currently being blocked by an anonymous new property management firm. Alistair laughed far too loudly at the landlord's jokes, his smile painfully tight and strained. He used the lavish, over-the-top vow renewals swirling around them as absolute, undeniable proof of his family's liquidity and elite status. Business has literally never been better, Alistair lied effortlessly, adjusting his silk tie. My brokerage is expanding rapidly, and we are perfectly positioned to sign a 10-year lease renewal on the downtown tower. Just look at this magnificent event tonight. You do not throw a gala of this magnitude if your capital is tied up or your business is failing. We are thriving. While the men peddled their desperate financial fictions, my mother Veda was busy managing the family's social narrative. She had gathered a captive audience of aunts, uncles, and cousins who had enthusiastically returned my RSVP cards with harsh rejections. We absolutely dodged a bullet, Veda declared loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the elegant string quartet playing in the corner. Alistair and I had to make the incredibly difficult choice to cut Maeve off completely to protect the family brand. Can you imagine the sheer humiliation if we were sitting in some cheap public park right now watching her marry a man who plunges toilets for a living? It would have ruined our standing in the community. The relatives nodded in fervent, eager agreement, happily validating her cruelty to secure their own invitations to future elite parties. They were entirely drunk on their own perceived superiority, reveling in the fact that they had successfully crushed my spirit. They stood at the absolute pinnacle of their artificial empire, drinking expensive champagne and laughing at my expense, completely blind to the digital shockwave that was currently racing straight toward their phones. The algorithm needed exactly 4 minutes to catch fire. The 12 seconds of high-definition footage captured by Magnus bypassed the usual social media filters and landed directly on the feeds of the most powerful financial analysts and tech journalists in the country. It started as a ripple on Twitter. Within 10 minutes, it morphed into a massive, unstoppable digital tsunami, flooding LinkedIn and taking over the trending pages of every major business publication on the East Coast. The caption attached to the video was sharp, factual, and completely devastating. It read, "Silicon Valley's biggest mystery solved. Billionaire Declan Cross, founder and CEO of Cross Global Group, weds in a hyper-private coastal ceremony." There were no long paragraphs explaining our love story. The footage spoke entirely for itself. The sweeping view of the Atlantic Ocean, the heavily guarded stone terrace, the undeniable raw power radiating from Declan in his bespoke tuxedo, and the blinding flash of the flawless diamond he slipped onto my finger. It was undeniable proof of absolute, apex-level wealth. Back at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the string quartet continued to play their elegant classical melodies. Right as Bastian finished his grand, fabricated speech about his close personal friendship with the CEO of Cross Global Group, the phones of the elite investors surrounding him began to buzz in unison. One of the senior investors pulled out his device, checking a high-priority news alert. He swiped to open the attached video. He watched the 12-second clip, his brow furrowing slightly as he absorbed the scene. He saw the rugged, unmistakable profile of Declan Cross. And then he looked closely at the bride in the simple, elegant white dress. The investor lowered his phone, his sharp, analytical gaze shifting from the screen directly to Bastian. He noticed the striking resemblance between the bride on his screen and the woman standing across the ballroom draped in crystals, claiming to be the queen of the evening. "Bastian," the investor said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the party with a deadly quiet authority. "You mentioned that you and the CEO of Cross Global Group are practically on a first-name basis." Bastian puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the trap snapping shut around his ankles. "Absolutely. We have been in constant communication. The investor did not smile. He simply extended his arm, holding his smartphone out toward Bastion. I am just curious why you are standing here drinking bourbon in a hotel ballroom instead of attending his wedding. Bastion let out a short, confused laugh, reaching out to take the phone. His wedding? What are you talking about? Bastion grabbed the device, his eyes dropping to the glowing screen. The first thing he registered was the caption. Bastion's arrogant smile froze on his face. His thumb hovered over the screen as the video began to loop again. He watched the tall, commanding figure in the custom-tailored tuxedo turn his head. It was the exact same face of the man who had stood in his living room just months ago wearing a cheap blue uniform and a name tag. The man Bastion had openly laughed at. The man he had mocked for making $15 an hour. The blood completely drained from Bastion's face, leaving an ashen, sickly gray in its wake. His breathing hitched. His eyes frantically darted to the bride in the video. He saw my face, radiant and glowing with absolute joy. Bastion's hands began to shake violently. The expensive glass of bourbon slipped from his grip, plummeting to the polished marble floor. It shattered upon impact, sending sharp shards of crystal and amber liquid splashing across his custom Italian leather shoes. The realization crashed down on him with the force of a freight train. The janitor he had ruthlessly humiliated was Declan Cross. The founder of the very corporation Bastion was currently lying about to save himself from federal fraud charges. And worse, the woman Declan Cross had just married was the exact same sister-in-law Bastion had deliberately ostracized and forced the entire family to boycott. The investors watched Bastion's silent, hyperventilating panic with deepening disgust. They were ruthless predators themselves, and they instantly recognized the distinct scent of a dying animal. They turned their backs on him and began aggressively making their way toward the heavy double doors. There was no polite mingling, no graceful goodbyes. They abandoned full plates of expensive seafood and fled. Across the room, Alistair's phone rang. He answered it with a booming, arrogant greeting, expecting the property manager to confirm his 10-year lease renewal. Instead, the voice on the other end was cold and absolute. There would be no lease renewal. The manager stated clearly that the high-rise building housing Alistair's brokerage had been officially acquired that very morning. The new parent company was executing a ruthless purge of the building's tenant portfolio, and Alistair's firm had been specifically flagged for immediate eviction due to a severe misalignment of corporate values. Alistair demanded to know the identity of the new owner. The manager spoke the name with profound reverence. Cross Global Group. The CEO, Declan Cross, personally issued the termination order himself. Alistair's smartphone slipped from his trembling fingers, bouncing off the polished marble tiles. His knees buckled slightly. The sprawling event space, rented for an astronomical sum to project an illusion of untouchable prestige, was rapidly emptying. Within 20 minutes, the grand, ultra-exclusive gala was reduced to an opulent ghost town. Imogen stood entirely alone in the center of the massive dance floor, her heavy crystal-studded gown weighing her down like a suit of armor for a battle she had already catastrophically lost. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of Bastion gasping for air. The sprawling coastal estate that had served as the perfect, heavily guarded sanctuary for my wedding the day before was now completely locked down. The morning after the ceremony, Declan and I sat on the private ocean terrace, enjoying a quiet breakfast. The Atlantic breeze was crisp and revitalizing, carrying away the final traces of the stress I had carried for months. I was officially married to a man who had proven his absolute devotion, and I was entirely insulated from the toxic family I had finally left behind. But across the city, the catastrophic fallout of their own actions had driven my family to pure, unadulterated desperation. Around 10 o'clock, Declan's encrypted tablet buzzed on the glass patio table. He glanced at the screen, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face before he slid the device over to me. It was a live security feed from the massive wrought iron gates at the perimeter of the estate. The high-definition cameras captured a scene of complete, frantic humiliation. Parked haphazardly at the entrance was my father's luxury sedan. Standing outside the heavy gates, aggressively flanked by Declan's elite security personnel, were Alistair, Veda, Imogen, and Bastion. They looked absolutely destroyed. Alistair's usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and his suit jacket was deeply wrinkled. He was pacing back and forth, clutching his phone, looking like a man who had not slept for a single second. Imogen was no longer dripping in crystals or boasting about her high society connections. She wore oversized sunglasses to hide her puffy, red eyes, holding onto her mother's arm as if she might collapse at any moment. But it was Bastion who provided the most pathetic spectacle. The arrogant, flashy crypto manager who had loudly mocked a $15 an hour wage was currently hyperventilating against the stone pillar. He was sweating profusely, trying to reason with the unmoving security guards. Through the tablet's audio feed, the sheer desperation in their voices filtered through. "You have to let us in," Alistair pleaded, his booming voice completely stripped of its former authority. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding regarding my commercial lease. I need to speak with my son-in-law immediately. I can explain everything. I just need 5 minutes with Mr. Cross to save my brokerage." The security guard remained entirely stoic, his dark sunglasses reflecting Alistair's desperate, pleading face. "You are not on the cleared guest list, sir. Step away from the gate." Bastion pushed past his father-in-law, his panic escalating into pure hysteria. He actually dropped to his knees on the pristine gravel, clutching the iron bars of the gate. "Please," Bastion sobbed, his voice cracking violently. "You do not understand. My entire fund is facing federal indictment. I need the bailout. I am family. Tell Declan that his brother-in-law needs the capital injection. I will do anything. Just let me talk to him." Seeing that her husband and son-in-law were failing, Veda pushed her way to the intercom system mounted on the stone wall. She slammed her hand against the call button, tears streaming down her face, fully relying on her ultimate weapon of emotional manipulation. "Maeve." Veda sobbed loudly into the speaker. "Maeve, honey, if you can hear me, please open the gates. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. I know things got a little tense, but I always knew you would be successful. Please, sweetie, you cannot just abandon us when we need you." I sat on the terrace, watching the live feed on the tablet. I listened to the woman who had actively orchestrated a massive boycott of my wedding, who had publicly shamed me in a group chat, and who had ordered me to hide my marriage like a dirty secret. She was now weeping into an intercom, pretending she had always supported me simply because she realized my husband possessed the power to crush her entire existence. The hypocrisy was so profound, so intensely pathetic, that I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I looked at Declan. He was watching me carefully, giving me complete control over the situation. This was my family, and this was my choice. I was fully prepared to let the guards physically remove them, or he was prepared to let me address them. I looked up at Declan, the man who had just handed me the keys to my own liberation. He understood immediately. Without needing a single word of explanation, he gave a subtle, sharp nod to the security detail commander standing near the edge of the terrace. The massive wrought iron gates, which had stood as an impenetrable defensive fortress just moments before, began to let out a deep mechanical groan. They slowly swung inward, parting to reveal the stunning, jarring contrast between our tranquil coastal sanctuary and the frantic, hyperventilating wreckage of my bloodline. Declan and I walked down the pristine gravel driveway side by side. We did not rush. We moved with a deliberate, unshakable calm, our footsteps crunching rhythmically against the stone. As we crossed the threshold of the open gates, the tactical security guards seamlessly parted, forming an imposing, impenetrable wall of dark suits directly behind us. Alistair, Veda, Imogen, and Bastion looked up, their eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of renewed hope. They saw me stepping outside and genuinely believed that their emotional manipulation had worked. They thought that blood would ultimately conquer all, that my lifelong conditioning as the eager-to-please scapegoat would automatically override their unforgivable cruelty. Bastion practically crawled forward on the sharp gravel. Maeve, thank God, he gasped, his custom-tailored suit stained with dirt and sweat. You have to tell Declan to push the capital injection through. The federal agents are auditing my offshore accounts tomorrow morning. I will go to federal prison. Please, we are family. Alistair violently pushed past his own son-in-law, his face pale and profoundly haggard. Maeve, sweetie, he pleaded, using a childhood nickname he had not uttered in over 2 decades. The commercial real estate market will eat me alive. My brokerage will be entirely bankrupt by Friday if that eviction stands. You know I was just stressed about the lease. I was just trying to protect our corporate brand. You have to reverse the termination. Veda surged forward, grabbing at the empty air as if trying to physically reel me back under her control. Imogen stood directly behind her, weeping silently into her hands, completely stripped of all her crystal-studded arrogance. We love you, Veda sobbed, her expensive designer makeup running in dark streaks down her face. We always wanted the absolute best for you. Please just give us another chance. Blood is thicker than water. I looked down at the 4 people who had spent my entire existence making me feel microscopic. For 32 years, they had weaponized their conditional love, using my self-worth as a bargaining chip to elevate their own hollow prestige. Yet, standing there in the warm ocean sunlight, I felt 0 anger, 0 sorrow, and 0 pity. I looked at their tear-stained, terrified faces with icy detachment. When I stood in your corporate office, I said, locking eyes with my father, my voice echoing clearly and steadily over the sound of the crashing Atlantic waves. You gave me an ultimatum. You told me to take a bribe and hide my marriage like a dirty, shameful secret. You told me that if I walked out that door, I was completely cut off from the family legacy. I shifted my cold gaze to my mother, who was trembling violently in her luxury sundress. When I refused to comply with your demands, you rallied 86 relatives to boycott my wedding. You made sure that I walked down the aisle to a completely empty room. You both looked me directly in the eye and told me to consider this family as having no daughter like me. I let the weight of their own vicious words hang in the coastal air, watching the realization of their inescapable doom wash over them. So, I continued, my tone completely unwavering. Consider it done. Alistair opened his mouth to argue, to launch into another desperate negotiation, but the sheer, freezing finality in my voice immediately silenced him. Bastion, I said, turning my attention to the ruined crypto manager. Your bailout is officially denied. Cross Global Group does not partner with frauds. Bastion let out a hollow, agonizing wail. He buried his face in his hands, collapsing back into the dirt as the horrifying reality of his impending federal indictment completely crushed him. And Dad, I added, staring directly into Alistair's terrified, widening eyes. Your eviction stands exactly as issued. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my husband's building. Alistair staggered backward, clutching his chest as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. His knees buckled slightly, his entire professional legacy evaporating into thin air right before his eyes. Maeve, please. Veda screamed, dropping to her knees on the sharp gravel, her hands clasped together in pure, unadulterated panic. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. You are my family, I corrected softly, without raising my voice a single decibel. Now you are just trespassers. I did not wait for another desperate plea or listen to another tearful, manufactured apology. I simply turned my back on them. Declan placed a firm, deeply protective hand on the small of my back, guiding me away from the wretched display of their destruction. We walked back through the imposing iron gates, stepping onto the immaculate, peaceful grounds of our home. The security commander pressed a button on his remote. The heavy iron gates began to close. I did not turn around to watch my parents weeping or my sister collapsing in the dirt. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Declan and on the beautiful, limitless horizon stretching out over the ocean ahead of us. With a resounding, heavy clang, the massive gates slammed shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a sharp, definitive click. In that singular, powerful moment, the toxic weight of my past was completely and permanently severed. I locked my abusive family out of my life forever, leaving them standing in the cold gravel to face their total, inescapable ruin entirely on their own. Looking back at the heavy iron gates that forever separated me from my past, I realized that the greatest illusion we are sold in life is that blood inherently dictates loyalty. For 32 years, I allowed my worth to be measured by a toxic scorecard of wealth, status, and artificial prestige. My family stripped away my confidence piece by piece, trying to convince me that being ostracized was the ultimate punishment. But isolation was not a punishment at all. It was a crucible. Walking down that aisle alone was the most terrifying and liberating moment of my entire existence. It taught me that when you stop desperately shrinking yourself to fit at a table where you were never respected, you finally create the space to build a sanctuary of your own. The true lesson of this journey is about the necessity of setting brutal, unapologetic boundaries. It is about understanding that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that is actively destroying you. You must be willing to walk away from anyone who demands you compromise your dignity, even if they share your last name. True power is not a diamond watch or a commercial lease. It is the quiet, unshakable piece of a life built on genuine love and mutual respect. I turned my back and left my blood relatives to burn in the ashes of the fire they started themselves. Many people tell me I was too ruthless, that I pushed them too far into a corner. What do you think? Was I wrong to deny them a second chance, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found strength in my story and want to hear more about reclaiming your power from toxic people, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.